Welcome to What's the Purpose of It, the podcast where we challenge the current work paradigm and explore how to shift from competition to regeneration, from stress to purpose. Let's rethink work together.
My parents' generation did stay in a job for 40 years and they did retire with an amazing pension. But that's not the case anymore. The educational institutions are really going to have to gear up for people in their 40s and early 50s wanting to train for their next career. And these institutions need to change because they're very geared up for 18-year-olds, not 45-year-olds. The average person changes jobs 8 to 10 times throughout their career. So, people can't just retire when they hit the magic retirement age. It requires kind of planning. So I see many companies approach this from a financial perspective, but finance is just one element of retirement. There's many more things to it.
I was just imagining my grandma that got very depressed after she retired. It was really hard for her. And she kind of felt lonely, and no matter how much attention we would have give her, it couldn't somehow balance whatever she was getting out of her job.
When you look at people of retirement age and they've grown up going, there is going to be a retirement age, so I'm going to retire at that point, stop work, and then within a year or two kind of regret the move because they kind of miss their friendship groups, they miss the challenge, they miss the social kind of interaction. We need people to work longer, work for more years. But as businesses, we kind of favor the younger individuals joining the workplace. So there's a real mismatch between what society needs and what's going on in the workplace.
So here we are today. We're having a very special guest, someone that I have been waiting for more than a year and a half to talk to. And now finally we got the chance to sync. It's Steve Butler, author of Midlife Review, one of the books that made me look a little bit different at work, my jobs, everything I do in 10 to 15 years from now, because we're quite stuck in the present. I have to grow, I have to do this and that. About the exit from the workforce. So Steve, thank you so much for being here. And I want to ask you, how did you start this?
Well, I'll be straight and honest up front. I'm 55. So over the last kind of 10 years, I've been going through my own midlife process, I guess. And I was very aware that in my industry, which is the kind of investment and savings industry, people were reaching 50, 55, and they were being made redundant. And most people in the industry were in their 30s and 40s, and there weren't many kind of later career individuals in the industry. And that got me thinking, because we're in a society where society's aging. The government can't afford pensions for everyone as they age, because people are kind of living longer. So as a society, we need people to work longer and work for more years. But as businesses, we kind of favor the younger individuals joining the workplace. So there's a real mismatch between what society needs and what's going on in the workplace.
So if we have this mismatch, where is it coming from? What are the employers doing now, or how are they treating seniors? And then when I'm saying seniors, I talk about professionals that have already 20 years of experience behind them.
Yeah, I think society is ageist, and it's deep rooted in society. We say things like, younger people are kind of more innovative, they have more energy, they're better with technology, implying that if you're not younger, then you're not those things. So I think this is challenge number one. And I think, the organizations are very geared up to recruiting graduates, training graduates, becoming a professional at what you do. So as an individual, in the first half of your career, you're very focused on kind of building a career and being the best that you can be. In the second part of your career, life happens around you. You kind of have a family, and your parents get older, and there's other things going on, and your career isn't necessarily the most important thing in your life. and you give it less attention. And if you don't give it the attention, you're not necessarily going to be continue to be competitive in the workplace. And I think that's kind of one of the challenges we face, which was where the Midlife Review book came about. Because the Midlife Review book was, one, asking employers to think about how are they supporting people as they transition into kind of midlife, and making sure they have the right skills to stay in the workplace and continue to support the business. And for the individual to reflect and say, well, okay, I trained to be X. Do I still want to be X? I put all this thought in when I was 18 about what I wanted to do. Is that still what I want to do? And am I approaching the second half of my career with the same purpose as I did my first part of my career?
That sounds just about right. And the career counselor within me was like, yeah, exactly. So you nailed it 100%. But I was thinking when I was listening to you, I think that perhaps your generation and even my generation got this narrative that we have to have one job, one career, linear. We have to stick in there. We have to grow. I don't know, managers, become like, get some stock options perhaps, and just stay there until the company either fires us or it's about time for a pension fund. But
yeah, and that's because that's what we watched an older generation before us do. You know, my parents' generation did stay in a job for 40 years, and they did retire with an amazing pension.
They're jealous now.
but that's not the case anymore. You know, many people, I think the average person changes jobs eight or 10 times throughout their career. Pensions aren't as generous as they kind of were in the past. So people can't just retire when they hit the magic retirement age. It requires kind of planning. And then I think the other part, when I speak about retirement, is it was very much a cliff edge in the past. You know, in the UK 20 years ago, retirement age was 64. And my grandfather retired at 64 and died at 65. Whereas now people are living into their 80s and 90s. So retirement itself is not something to approach and not plan. So, for many people, retirement is about stepping back their workload rather than stopping work entirely. So we're kind of now in a society where we glide into retirements rather than a kind of cliff edge. Here's the day that you retire.
Well, I was wondering, I think we might have some cultural differences, Romania versus the UK, but mostly I think we identify with the idea that the society is being ageist. So the first time I've encountered this was when my parents, who were 50, I think at that time, had to leave the country, had to leave Romania and move to Germany because they were no longer wanted in here. They would always get this, you're overqualified kind of feedback, but it was an underlying, you're too old in our section. And it was very awkward to me how when they went to Germany, they were this gold for the labor market. Like agencies, HR agencies were like calling them nonstop to place them into jobs. And I was like, wow, in Romania, you're jumping overboard. They're actually pushing you overboard. And you go to another country where they actually embrace your age and you actually become an asset. So I was wondering, what makes these differences? Why are companies stuck in this idea that the younger, the better? Although I would have to outline a paradox here, that if we ask them about Gen X, they're going to complain about them a lot. And they're going to say that experience is better. So what's happening here? It kind of gets people confused.
Yeah, so in the UK market in 2010, we had the Equality Act, which made it illegal to treat someone negatively because of their age. So you couldn't fire someone because of their age or get rid of them because they're their age. And then it was in 2013 that we removed a forced retirement age. So we've only had 10 years where someone has a choice to kind of work to whatever age they want. And I think business is still catching up to the legislation. So, there are many magic circle law firms in London where the partners in their partnership agreement have to leave at 60 or 55. And that's to make way for younger partners to kind of come in. And I think historically we had a workforce with more younger people in it. So we needed to make space for the younger generation. But we don't have this big post-war baby boom anymore. And we've got a smaller generation entering the workforce now. So the dynamics are changing, and we can't just focus on kind of making this linear journey for young people joining the workplace and kind of having this career. We've got to think about people leaving the workplace and rejoining the workplace and changing careers at different ages, or becoming apprentices at different ages, etc. Because we don't have the same society structure that we had 40 years ago.
That's so insightful. And it makes so much sense that we just need to adjust our practices to the new reality. But what I often see around me, it's a denial of this new reality. It's like, it's just a phase. It's going to pass out. It's going to change very soon. Oh, we've been through this, I don't know when in history, but then it all worked out. So how do we embrace that this is the new reality? And it's actually not much...
In certain industries, in the UK, in the hospitality industry, we've kind of had a double whammy. So we have this age dynamic happening, but we also had Brexit. So we don't have the influx of kind of Europeans into the workforce to kind of support the hospitality industry. We've got a smaller, younger generation who perhaps not choosing to work in the hospitality industry anymore. And we've got a real skill shortage going on there, to the extent that many companies are saying, we're an age-friendly employer. If you're 50 and you want to become a chef, we'll train you to be a chef. And in fact, having the experience that sometimes these older workers perhaps have less sick days, and actually quite good at hospitality jobs where they're communicating with people and kind of hosting people, etc. So we're seeing that shift in the hospitality industry because they have to. If they don't do this, they've got nobody in the jobs. In other industries, TV and film, we've got the ageism in society is still there. We still favor younger, more attractive people. Apparently, you're more attractive if you're younger, so therefore you're more suitable to TV and film. So, it's quite industry specific.
It sounds so insightful, and at the same time, it kind of makes sense. They're going to have to accept it when they're going to have no more people working for them. So
they
don't want to do it on their own. It's got. I just had a few episodes ago Wayne Visser, which is one of world's top 10 academics on regenerative business, and he was telling me that, well, they're either going to accept that they're the dinosaurs that die out, or they're going to be the ones that are going to lead the revolution. But one of these two, they're going to have to embrace it. And since we're talking about embracing stuff, okay, we've put a little bit of light on the companies and why they're where they at the moment, and considering their mindset. But I'm wondering, are people ready to work that much? Because from my experience in the past few years, I'm thinking at our career center where we had over 10,000 people coming and making their career plans for the next years. We've had quite a few making plans for exits around 50. Like they don't want to be in the workforce anymore. They want to YOLO, you only live once. They want to enjoy life. So are people ready to go ahead so further in their careers and work?
Again, it's a complex issue, and I think there's a number of things going on. Clearly, COVID had an impact. We were all kind of locked in our houses for a year or so, and that kind of, I need to embrace life has definitely happened. And we saw many people move out of London to the country to live a kind of fuller life, which kind of has had an impact. However, I think when you look at people of retirement age, and they've grown up going, there is going to be a retirement age, so I'm going to retire at that point, stop work, and then within a year or two kind of regret the move because they kind of miss their friendship groups, they miss the challenge, they miss the social kind of interaction. And in fact, I have the perfect example. My parents, who are 78 and 80, have returned to work.
Wow.
They work for a cruise ship company, and they welcome guests onto the cruise ship. And they love it because they get to meet different people every day. And it's flexible because they're only working when the kind of cruise ships are in. So it gives them that social interaction. It's minimum wage work, but they kind of don't care because they've kind of got a pension. What they want is social interaction, purpose,
That's
and
so nice.
and structure in their week. So I think, you know, as this is a new thing for all of us. So I think this will become very apparent to many people when they think about their future. Is actually, it's very easy to say I don't want to work, but what do I want to do? Because, you know, how much golf can you play, you know, or whatever it is that
How
you
much gardening
want to
can you
do.
do?
Exactly that. So I think, and with people living longer than that becomes an impact. And then the third thing I think is, you know, if we are going to work to 70, then we're going to have we've got a very long career, longer than previous generations. So the prospect of sticking in one career is unlikely for such a long period of time. So there is this acceptance now that we don't have this linear career and that we will move around. But if you want to do that, you know, when you started your career, you decided that you wanted to be whatever, a lawyer, and you went to university and you trained to be a lawyer. If you want to change your career, you've got to put the same amount of effort into that. So I think the educational institutions are really going to have to gear up for people in their 40s and early 50s wanting to train for their next career. And these institutions need to change because they're very geared up for 18-year-olds, not 45-year-olds. So I think there's a shift that needs to happen in the education sector as well.
I was thinking of the regret when you retire, and I was just imagining my grandma that got very depressed after she retired. It was really hard for her, and she kind of felt lonely. And no matter how much attention we would have give her, it couldn't somehow balance whatever she was getting out of her job. So it makes a whole lot of sense when you put it in this way. And I was also thinking that perhaps if we go into this kind of a mindset, we also have to understand that work can be done in a healthy manner. Because if I look at what we've done until now, we've overworked ourselves. And we've been into this workism mode where work was this kind of a god and it was everything. And I also don't think that if we put work at the center of our life, it's a good way of doing things. But when you put it in the perspective you painted, it's like work is here, it's a part of our life, but it's here to stay for a really long time. So you might as well develop a nice, healthy, curious relationship with it. And I totally love it. I love work. What can a former workaholic tell you other than right? And have a podcast about work itself.
But I think our perceptions do change over time. You know, certainly for myself, you know, until last year, I was running a business of 250 people, and you know, I was finding it tiring, and I decided to make a change, and I stopped that, and I'm now in a startup with 7 people, and it's a very different environment. It's actually more relaxed environment because I'm managing less people. So we need to have ways for people to transition from perhaps the pinnacle of their career to something else that still feels good for them, but is different. You know, and I've got an example here. In my previous business, I had a managing director who worked for me, and he got to 60, and he came to me and he said, "Steve, I'm kind of tired. You know, I think I'm going to retire." And I was like, "Oh, please don't retire. I kind of need you. You know, you're really important to me.
Didn't I?
Why don't you have a sabbatical? Take 3 months off and try retirement on for size." So he did. And at the end of the 3 months, he came back and went, I'm so glad I didn't retire. There's only so much coffee you can drink. And he came back. But he came back, he came back full of energy, but it lasted for about a year. And then he came back to me and said, look, Steve, I'm feeling the same again. So I said, well, let's change your job. Let's not have you managing a whole division. Let's move you into a coaching, mentoring role, supporting me in my kind of leadership activities, and we'll put someone else in your current role, and then you can work 3 days a week. And then he worked for another 3 years for me like that. So I think as an employer, if you value some of your employees, you've got to be flexible about their role and how they interact. Clearly, he couldn't be MD of a division on 3 days a week, but he was so valuable to me. I had to find other things for him to do, and he picked up project work. And if there was employees that needed extra help, he was there to support them. So I think that mindset needs to shift in the employer as well.
Oh, that was perfectly said. Mindset needs to shift in the employer as well. And the flexibility that you've proven to have in this situation, I would like to say this is how everybody does it, but we kind of know these are the exceptions. But perhaps these are also the best practices that companies are going to start looking at from now on. And I remember a while ago being in a project. It was called the Silver Project. And it was a project that gathered more specialists in the labor market from all over Europe. And we were looking at things like, how can companies implement this kind of silver projects into their organizations that would prepare people for their pension? So around 10 years before having to get ready for your 10 years before retiring, they were helping you to develop a retirement plan. So this is something I have never heard in Romania to be done. And if any of our listeners know a company that does that, please let me know. I would love to interview them. But do you see this kind of initiatives in the UK, or do you recommend? Do you have any kind of frameworks people should be interested in?
So I see many companies approach this from a financial perspective, and often sponsored by the pension companies themselves to educate people about kind of what they need to do from a financial perspective. But finance is just one element of retirement. There's many more things to it, and I think that's not being addressed. And for me, when I wrote the Midlife Review book, I had this in mind because it wasn't about retirement. It was about the second half of your career. But the second half of your career will lead into some form of retirement. So it has to form part of what you're thinking about. So I'm suggesting that people need to reflect and say, well, actually, what do I want my career to look like? If perhaps I've ticked some of the financial boxes, maybe there's a voluntary element that I could be doing that would run into retirement and I could continue to do. Maybe I could train to do something that was, different, but more flexible, which would kind of run into retirement. But people don't think, I think the challenge is, people live their lives and they don't think about retirement until the year before they retire. But you've got to be thinking about it 15, 20 years before it happens, so it is very linked to the second half of your career.
That indeed puts you on a perspective, like 20 years before. Yeah. I wouldn't, I have to think of this. I told you until I saw your book, I thought that it's like 4 years in front of me.
Well, I hear so many people say, oh, yeah, I'm going to have a portfolio career when I go into my 60s. I'm going to have some non-exec jobs. But you don't just land non-exec jobs. You have to train for them. You have to get your first one and cut your teeth with it before you get your next one.
Get a reputation, a brand.
Yeah. So if you want to be doing this in your 60s, you've got to be doing your first one, probably on a voluntary basis as a trustee, in your 40s in order to kind of build the expertise for that. So I think it does require a strategic view on your career, which you do take when you're 18.
That's true. And you just said that people usually think about this a year before, like I have to think of this. is there something companies could do different in order to, maybe educate is not the best word, maybe to create awareness on the topic for people? What would you like? We have a lot of HR professionals, team managers listening right now. They're the ones that are orchestrating the organizational culture, the performance reviews, all kind of HR policies. What could they do different?
So I think, if someone's going to be honest with their employer about their future ambitions, they have to trust their employer that
So
they're
step
not.
one.
Yeah. So you're not going to tell your employer that you want to work 3 days a week if you think that's going to result in you being made redundant because you only want to work 3 days. So you're only going to have that conversation if you trust your employer. And often, I've worked in small companies, often you're looking at ways to save money. And if one of your employees says, I want to work 3 days a week, you're going, great, because that will save me some money. So having these conversations are beneficial to both sides, but you have to trust both sides. And I think, again, these conversations, you might be, as an employee, you might be saying, well, it's my ambition to have my own business. And as an employer, you don't want to hear that.
That's true.
But if that meant they go part-time and they run their business part-time and they learn extra skills doing that they bring into your business, then that's a good thing. So if there's enough trust to be able to have that conversation and the business is empowering itself to support people in those decisions, it's kind of a win-win. But it's all about trust. If you don't trust your employer, you're going to keep your head down, not say anything.
Okay, so we can do a lot, but first we have to fix the trust issues we have in our organizations.
And you need role models. You need to see other people doing it and that type of thing. And I think there's also a training issue here when you think about your kind of older employees. So again, I've got another example. My daughter is 28. She's a software developer. So she's in the tech industry, which is a very young industry. And she was recruiting for a developer for her team recently. And she said to me, I need your help, Dad, because I've got 6 people have applied. 5 of them are graduates and one of them's 58. So, why would I take the 58-year-old? Because he doesn't know the technology. And I said, well, do the graduates know the technology? Well, no, I would teach them. I'm like, well, you could teach the 58-year-old. And what it came down to was her own fear of what it would be like to manage someone a lot older than her. So I think she needed training on, management technique for managing a diverse age group. It was naturally more comfortable for her to hire a 21-year-old and kind of manage the 21-year-old. So I think as an HR team, we need to look at the training that we're delivering to our teams to make sure they're equipped to have these diverse teams.
I can back up your example with another one of a manager that was supposed to recruit in the finance, audit, and finance industry, someone that knew a specific framework that was not taught in universities for about 20 years. So automatically the person would have been a senior. And this person didn't hire anyone for a year, although they were having interview, because he was keep on hoping that somebody 30-ish is going to finally come and know from out of the blue this framework. And in the end, HR approached him and realized that he didn't hire because he didn't know how to deal with people older than him as their subordinates. So I totally agree that we need better trainings when it comes to this for management. And I think one of the issues we have in this conversation is that we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion, and lately we talk about canceling it because, of course, we just made progress. Why not cancel? But even so, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, I don't see much talk about age diversity and intergenerational teams. What are we missing there?
I absolutely agree with you. It's kind of the last thing that anyone adds to their ED&I kind of policies if someone mentions it to them. And I think it links to just the acceptability of ageism in our society. It's so prevalent. I watch TV every day and I can see ageist remarks all the time from all sorts of characters and things, and it's just there. So, however, the business case is very strong, as I've already kind of alluded to. So, I do lots of campaigning in this area. I'm a trustee for a charity in the UK called the Centre for Aging Better. And it very much focuses on the workplace as one of its work streams. And it's created an age pledge where employers pledge to make a commitment to kind of managing age diversity in their organizations. It's got about 400 companies that have signed this age pledge at the moment, but most companies that have signed it are already diverse from an age perspective. So it's still got some way to go to get some of these young technology businesses or kind of entertainment type businesses to go, actually, there's some benefit to our business in being more age diverse. And I think, we need to talk more about the benefits of that diversity. And the benefits the same with any diversity. You get better innovation because you've got a broader cross section of society, developing whatever it is that your company does.
But although from everything you said, it makes perfect sense to have intergenerational teams, I also see, again, companies being quite reluctant in creating intergenerational teams because they're very afraid of the generational war. Because, of course, I will always have something to do with my mom, and because it's my mom, but automatically we just believe we don't like people that are older than us, but it's just something you have to do with your parents. But people bring that a lot in the office. How do we fix that?
Yeah, I don't know. My last company, as I said, was of a certain size, and we were actually very diverse. I didn't have the conflict, or where I did have conflict, I had to actively manage it. So, many examples here, but one of the things that causes a lot of conflict is mobile phones. I had an older generation that when they spoke to someone wanted to have eye contact, and I had a younger generation that wanted to kind of multitask all the time and were quite happy to have a conversation without actually looking at you. So in theory, that was a point of conflict, but we just said in meetings, this is how we behave. Phones down in meetings. And the younger generation said, well, that's fine. You've told me to do that. Of course I'm going to do that. And the older generation was happy. So there are a few point of conflicts, but you've just got to manage them. It's all, as with all diversity inclusion, it's about seeing potential areas that might upset people or kind of create conflict and addressing them up front. So it feels like a nice place for everyone. And the reality is, people do enjoy working with people of all ages, because they all have something different to add. And I think if both or all sides are recognized for what they add, then it's a win-win.
Totally agree. I love this perspective, and I hope more and more companies are going to become aware of how valuable is to have this intergenerational teams. And we're getting really close to the end of our talk, and I was just having one question in the back of my mind. Is a midlife review moment the same thing with a midlife crisis?
Yeah, the midlife crisis is not a great phrase, is it? Because I haven't had a crisis, but I did go back to university in my late 40s, and I've changed my career. I wouldn't say that was a crisis. That was just me kind of managing my life as we should do, which is what the midlife review is all about. It's about bringing employees and employers together to map out a career journey that works for both sides.
So maybe a crisis is something you encounter when you did not do the midlife review.
Yeah,
get the midlife crisis. Maybe
possibly
to look at things. But I don't want to finish this conversation before getting the chance to hear what you do currently with that team of 7 people.
Okay, so in the UK market, we had lots of people with these wonderful defined benefit pensions, this older generation that we spoke about that retired with great pensions. And over the last 20 years, there's been a shift to defined contribution pensions where you just put money in and you have to save enough for your retirement. So and people are self-managing what they do with their pension. So if you have £250,000 or more, you can afford an advisor to kind of help you with these decisions. However, 95% of society doesn't have that much money, and they're getting no support at all. So I have built a online solution to help people with smaller pension pots make the decisions at the point of retirement. And I'm kind of working with pension companies and employers to kind of embed this technology into the kind of experience of people as they approach retirement.
I just really hope the right people from Romania have listened to this podcast, especially for the last part, because I've already asked if you can bring that to Romania, but apparently it's something UK regulation based. So if we want this in Romania, somebody needs to start working on it really fast. And I also remembered the age pledge. I really love that idea. And again, I hope there's someone listening to us from the NGO environment that is going to take such an initiative. I would be very happy to back it up with my community. Steve, thanks so much for the conversation, for all the insights, and for the example that you lead by. And I really hope we're going to get the chance to talk more about how your new startup is going. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Cheers.
Thanks for joining What's the Purpose of It? Until the next time, keep challenging the rules, rethinking the norm, and building workplaces where purpose leads the way. See you soon.